I'm a salmon farmer from a small village in Argyll called Dalmally. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk to you about salmon farming. I'm actually a university dropout. Went to university when I was about 17, and I was chronically shy. The idea of standing up and giving a public talk, I never would have believed I ever would have done that. So kind of amuses me now that I spent half my life traveling around the world giving talks about what's happened in my life and this work of Mary's Meals. And the story really begins over a pint of beer back in 1992. I was out in our local pub one night with my brother, and we were just having a chat over a pint. And that particular evening, we'd been watching a news bulletin that was at the height of the war in Bosnia. And we began saying to each other, wouldn't it be great if we could just do one small thing to help the people in Bosnia who are suffering? And we began saying maybe we could collect food and clothing and we could drive it there. And so the next day, before we really thought it through properly, we began saying to people we knew, would you give us food and clothing and medicines and so on? And about 3 weeks after that conversation in the pub, we found ourselves driving this old Land Rover out of Argyll across Europe and delivered the aid into this refugee camp in Bosnia. And I always say that was the first miracle in the story. It was the first time that my brother and I ever hatched a plan over a pint that actually happened. So that was amazing enough. But I came back at the end of that week, having delivered the aid, thinking, I've done my good deed, and now it'll be back to work on the fish farm as normal. But that's not what happened at all, because by the time I got home, all these things that we'd asked for continued to pour into our family home. There were mountains of food and clothing. And so I thought about it, and I prayed about it, and decided to give up my job, and sold my house, and somebody gave me a truck. And I simply just began driving back and forth from Scotland to Bosnia, taking this aid that continued to pour in to the people in the refugee camps. But even then I thought, I'll probably do this for a few months or maybe a year at most, and then it'll be back to the real world again. And that never happened. And it never happened really just because that story I told you first of all of making a plea on behalf of the poor or on behalf of people suffering through war and being overwhelmed by the response, that's really just been our story these 20 years since then. In the first 10 years of our work, we worked under the name Scottish International Relief. And there was no particular theme to our work at that time. We were getting involved in all kinds of different things, really just going where we were invited to help. So for example, we were working in Romania with children who'd been abandoned in hospitals there, children who were HIV positive. And we began taking aid into those hospitals, and then we realized very quickly that those children, it wasn't really going to change their lives, bringing them food and medicine and so on. What they really needed was someone to pick them up and to love them and to care for them properly. So we began opening homes for them. We opened 3 homes. We thought they were going to be hospices. We thought the children would only live for a very short period of time. And here we are 10 years later. Most of those children we took out of the hospital are young adults. I went back for the weddings of 3 of the girls last summer. So just that project alone taught me so much about how lives really can change, and it really encouraged me to go on. And we did go on. We opened more homes in Latin America. We were running mobile health clinics in West Africa, in Liberia during the war there, all kinds of things. Then in 2002, the Mary's Meals campaign was born. And Mary's Meals, we believe, is a simple solution to world hunger. And that's not just an idea, it's something we've seen that really, really works. So 2002 was this terrible famine year across southern Africa. Malawi was probably the worst affected country. And we were there just doing very simple emergency feeding programs, taking food from the cities into villages that we decided to look after during that time of famine. And while we were doing that, I met this family that had a huge impact on me and really triggered the birth of Mary's Meals. They lived in a small 2-room mud hut. The father of the family had died about a year previously, and the mother of the family was dying when I went into their home. She was called Emma, she had AIDS and she had a few weeks to live. And she was lying on her floor, and she had her 6 children around her. And Emma said to me, you know, there's nothing left for me now except to pray that somebody's going to look after my children when I'm gone. And she was really panicking about that. And then I started talking to her oldest child beside her, and he was called Edward, and he was about 14 years old. And at one point in the conversation, I asked him, maybe like you'd ask any young person you meet for the first time, I said, Edward, what are your hopes in life? What are your ambitions? And he looked at me and he said, I'd like to have enough food to eat, and I'd like to be able to go to school one day. And that was it. That was the extent of Edward's ambition at 14 years old. And that was something that we'd encountered over and over again working in the world's poorest communities. We continually met children who weren't going to school because of poverty, children who were begging on the streets or working in the rubbish dumps, or helping their parents in the fields, just doing whatever it takes to put the next meal on the table, and therefore missing out on their schooling. And yet at the same time, over and over again, it's been proven that a basic education for all is the key to lifting the world's poorest communities out of poverty. So Mary's Meals became a very, very simple response to try and break that cycle of poverty that children like Edward are trapped in. Today in the world, there are about 61 million children like him who are out of school. And that response became the provision of one good meal every day in a place of education. And by doing that, meeting the immediate need of the hungry child for food, but at the same time, tackling the underlying causes of poverty by using that food to draw them into the classroom, to enable them to come to school. And I think the way we began that first Mary's Meals project in 2002 was really, really key to why it's been successful. The first thing we did was we had a meeting in a local community there, and we said to the people that came, look, we've got this idea that we would like to start serving meals in your primary school, but we'll only do it if you believe it's a good idea. We'll only do it if you want to take ownership for this idea, and if you would be willing to do the daily work as volunteers to cook and serve the food. And immediately the people in that village said, yes, this is what we want, this is what we need for our children. And they began organizing themselves to do the daily work. And so we began providing the food. And from the beginning, we had a very strong philosophy that we wanted as much as possible to buy the food locally, to buy it in country, so that we were helping the local economy, helping the local farmer. So that's what we did from the beginning in Malawi. We sourced the food from local farmers, and we delivered it to this school. Almost immediately, we could see this wasn't just a nice idea. It was something that was really going to work, because almost immediately children who'd never been to school before began coming to school for the first time. And then very soon the next school in the next village came to us and said, can we have Mary's Meals as well, please? And we said yes. And so it went on and on and on. So today, it's just about exactly 10 years since the beginning of Mary's Meals, we're feeding 730,000 children every day, every school day, across 16 different countries. Lots of different cultures, different environments, different situations, but always that same principle, one meal every day in a place of education. So for example, we're providing those meals for semi-nomadic people in the north of Kenya, the Turkana people. We're providing it for children living in the slums of Haiti, who suffer so much there in slums where many children are dying of malnutrition every day. We provide the meals for long-term refugees in Thailand, Burma, Thailand, in the north of Uganda, the same. In India, we provide meals for communities of so-called Dalit communities, Dalit children who are normally excluded from school, who come from communities who for centuries have never had the possibility of mainstream school. And there we gather 40 or 50 children at a time. They're all working children. They all work in the rubbish dumps looking for things that they can recycle and sell. And we say to them, if you just come to us for 3 hours to our group, we'll give you a good meal and we'll introduce you to education. So we gather 40 or 50 of them on a railway platform or under a tree in the village, wherever we can find a safe place. And we provide them that meal. And they taste education for the first time. And it works. We see them now, after a number of years, going on into mainstream education for the first time. So the power of that one meal every day never ceases to amaze me. And one of the beautiful things at this stage of Mary's Meals after a few years is to be able to travel to some of those countries where we work and to meet young people who are now leaving school and who tell me they would never ever have gone to school without the meals, and who are now going on to a completely different life than they ever otherwise could have imagined. I met a young man in Haiti a couple of years ago. He was called James, and this day I met him, he was celebrating. He was 18 years old, he was head boy of his school, really intelligent guy, spoke perfect English, played the guitar really well. And this day he was so happy because he had just received news that he'd been given a place in college to study agriculture. And he just said to me, you know, how his passion in life was to help the people of Haiti to grow more food so that they would no longer be reliant on aid. And ultimately that's what Mary's Meals is all about. It's young people like him in those communities, in those countries, that are going to lift their communities out of chronic poverty. And that's something really important for us in this work, because I think there's a danger sometimes in humanitarian aid work and charitable work that we start to think, those of us from the wealthier countries, that we are the givers, and that people in places like Africa and India are simply passive receivers of our aid. It's not like that at all. It's not like that with Mary's Meals. It's about a whole lot of us around the world walking together with that same objective, that the child receives one meal every day in the place of education. So whether that be people in the West who are giving the money to buy the food, or the people in Malawi who get up at first light to light the fires, to cook the food that they serve, we're all united in that same mission. And for us that's really, really important, that mutual respect and that local ownership of the project as much as possible. When I first began this work of Mary's Meals, sometimes I would give talks and I would say to people that our vision for Mary's Meals is that every child in the world should be able to receive at least one good meal every day in their place of education. And I know at first when I would do that, people would sometimes look at me like I was mad, like I'd really lost the plot to have a vision so ambitious, so grand. But I have to say, in all honesty, the more I see this work of Mary's Meals grow around the world, people all over the world are supporting this work now, the more I really believe that this is possible. We grow more than enough food in this world for all of us, far more than enough food for all of us in this world. Today we can feed a child on average for £10.70 for an entire school year. And yet at the same time, we know today that about 18,000 children have died of starvation, have died of hunger-related causes. I think that's much more insane in this world of plenty, and that's what drives us on. I've just come back from America last night, where thousands of people are starting to support this work, and because they believe in it, especially young people. It's a huge movement going on in schools and universities there and in many places who now share that vision that there is no good reason why this isn't possible. And the movement of Mary's Meals is so much run by volunteers all over the world. People are doing what they can to raise awareness through social media, through speaking events, to raise those small amounts of money that we need. And it's very, very much a grassroots movement. It's lots of people doing small things. And that's what allows us almost every week to go to the next school in our waiting list and to begin Mary's Meals there. I've talked a little bit about the longer term benefits of of Mary's Meals about people going on beyond school, and that their life has opened up completely in a different way, and about how that education can set communities free of poverty. But at the same time, Mary's Meals every day is simply keeping children alive. Recently I was in Malawi again, and I met a young girl who was about 11 years old, and her mum died last year, and she's head of her household. She has 2 younger brothers that she looks after. And I spent one morning with her before school, and it was so moving just to watch her get her little brothers ready for school and for nursery. One of them went to a nursery where we also provide Mary's Meals. And to just be with her that morning and watch her carry her little brother to school. And only when she had him there safely did she go back and get ready for her own school, where she also received Mary's Meals. And to hear her talk about the pain of hunger, what it feels like to go days on end without eating, and to hear her tell us that many, many days the Mary's Meals they get at school is the only food they eat, really brought it home to me again that every day this work is also just simply saving lives. Today in Malawi, we're feeding about 20% of the primary school population. And for the first time, the government in that country has decided to start school feeding themselves. And for us, that's such wonderful news, because ultimately that's what we want. We don't want to be relied upon forever. We believe that governments should be providing meals for their children in school. And the government in Malawi say that they've started to do that only because they've seen what's happened with Mary's Meals in their schools, in their country. So that's just another thing that encourages us to go on, and another reason to believe that this vision of ours, that every child in the world receives a meal every day in school, is possible. Thank you.